Stepping away from core legal news for just a few minutes, let's take a sneak peek at the reading habits of trailblazers and newsmakers from across the legal fraternity on Behind the Bookshelves.
On Behind the Bookshelf today, we have with us a senior third-term Member of Parliament, a man who was chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Law, an eminent jurist and national spokesperson of the Congress Party. Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, welcome to the show. So, the first question I wanted to ask you is, what is the first book that you remember reading to yourself, and what is the first book that you remember having been read to you?
It's a difficult one. I haven't been asked that question for decades. But if I think hard, it will probably be Enid Blyton and Billy Bunter around the same time, as far as reading myself is concerned. As far as being read to me is concerned, definitely my grandmother reading and telling me stories from the Mahabharata and then the Ramayana. But that is oral. This is very clear.
So, what do you think the impact of reading is on mental development in early childhood? Do you think it's very important that children should read, or do you think that other activities such as sports and...
I don't think the importance of reading in childhood, but quite frankly at any age, can be overemphasized. It's also something which fastens onto you as a habit. Therefore, starting early makes you keep that habit. In the old days, of course, we had the great advantage, which our children and grandchildren today have to struggle with, that the alternatives were far fewer. So, going to picnic in a park with the family and reading were two great alternatives instead, or at the most a movie instead of videos at home and iPads. But even then, between the class of people who were then were with the same options, those who read more and read less, there's always a clear distinction. And I think that comes from being pushed a little bit, from being told by our parents, and from an ambience. But as I said, you cannot possibly overemphasize, even at this age, the importance of reading. So it cultivates the mind, it focuses you, it's a non-passive activity, it sharpens your intellect, and it is so much more than being a passive recipient of doles of what somebody is giving you in a mechanical manner.
What kind of access to reading material did you have growing up as a child?
Well, during our time, there were a fair amount of books being published. I'm not that old, and therefore I think availability was easy. I also must confess that I was a great fan of Tintin comics. But then over time, you came into the James Hadley chases, and I'm talking of fiction. Yeah. And I must say that right through my teens and my 20s, it was mostly fiction. Entirely fiction, which is a very interesting contrast, because from the mid or the late 30s, I do 99% non-fiction and now biographies. So I don't know how long ago I read a fiction, except an occasional John Grisham. But otherwise, it's all non-fiction. Even in non-fiction, what I love are biographies, number one, and number 2 and 3, a little distant 2 and 3, would be comparative religion and history.
But why biographies?
This is interesting. I think somewhere around the 30s, I began to be inspired. Biographies are mainly because they inspire you. They educate you in a way, but they kind of embolden you, and they become an icon, a benchmark, a milestone for you to think about, emulate, and in some subconscious way try and copy. And I think possibly what changed it was a years ago book I read, Cronin, C-R-O-N-I-N, the author's name, a book on Napoleon. And I realized how a fascinating character Napoleon was. I realized how, but for the fact that we were colonized by the British, Napoleon would not have been painted as the villain which he was painted. I realized what an extraordinary talented man he was. I realized that his accomplishments were the most diverse and multifaceted that I could have thought of. And yet, he was so vilified, because when you read, you realize that it is your image and your projection depends very much on the ethos of the time.
So the guy who wins writes the history.
That's right. So I think that's a very interesting contrast from Napoleon real and actual versus Napoleon as portrayed by English writers.
So could you tell us about...
But that's where my interest in biography started.
Right. Yeah. Could you tell us about one favorite character from a children's book, and what about that character endeared itself to you?
Children's book, well, I would consider Enid Blyton
Yeah.
and Tintin, if you consider them children's books. These are the two favorite. Oh, of course, sorry. The third one was Archie.
So,
But remember, I haven't read these things from the 30s, except I do a Tintin occasionally now. So I was overly involved in these then and totally left them after that. But yes, Archie, Enid Blyton and Tintin.
so is there a character from those books that you particularly enjoyed?
Archie and Tintin.
Archie and Tintin are the two characters.
Yes.
What about them endeared themselves to you?
Well, it's just fun characters. In the case of Archie, a lot of good humor
Mhm.
and a laid-back humor of a kind of a laid-back guy who was not overwhelming, not over-aggressive. In Tintin, precisely the sharpness of action, of mind, which Tintin displays in difficult situations. Tintin is very entertaining. I also am a great fan of action thrillers in movies. So he's the closest analog to an action thriller on paper.
Right.
Whereas, of course, Archie is humor. But quite frankly, Archie I've forgotten now because I haven't read those comics for ages. Tintin I do once in a while now as well.
So we were speaking a little bit about Enid Blyton. What would you say to her critics? Some of them have called her racist, xenophobic, and sexist.
I know that retrospectively. I read on that in the more recent past. And I must say, my recollection, I mean, I've read those pieces now, but these are what are known as retrospective detailed analysis, which might be true. In that sense, Rudyard Kipling also. In that sense, but I think they're too sophisticated. I don't think the intention of these writers was to be racist. And I can tell you one thing, my recollection is not 1 millimeter. And I read them till somewhere in the late teens, not too small. Not in the millimeter being racist. That's my recollection. It is true that today, even a term like gentleman or chairman or he in statutes and not she can be considered feminist or racist.
But
that is not the intention of the writer. And I don't think, the Enid Blyton series has that intention. I certainly have no such recollection.
Could you tell us, I think this is the most difficult question in the segment, could you tell us who your favorite author all time is, period?
That's unfair question also. It's difficult
So
and unfair.
let's make
Because
it
there
2
are
or 3 authors.
many, it's unfair if I take one name. But yes, amongst, let me say, if you ask me the 5 best authors I would like, again that's unfair selection, I may not remember all, but a fair 5 selection would be Ramachandra Guha, outstanding man in terms of connecting the dots, disparate dots of different times in history.
Right.
I'm not on the subject matter so much as he can connect the dots in a different way. A, and give insights to those dots. B, one of the finest writers, not a regular writer, but one book only, Sparrow's Flight by Lord Hilsham, Lord Chancellor of Britain. Delightful way, the way biographies should be written. I've just picked up at great expense, it's not available easily, a copy which I read 30 years ago. I'm rereading it now. Third, for history, Abraham Irali. Not one of those high-powered academic authors, but how to make history interesting and in a simple, lucid way give a pattern of our times. He's done the whole Indian series, ancient India, Middle India, the Peacock rulers, the Mughals, etc. Very delightful. And as I said, of course, Cronin is high. So these are like 4 or 5 of the old. And of course, Nelson Mandela, I forgot. The Long March to Freedom is not so much because he's a good author, but here is a man who speaks as it is. And you see how indomitable the will of this one man is. It comes through that book, almost mind-numbing willpower.
It's a very matter-of-fact book.
And mind-numbing willpower,
Right.
which I think makes it one of the all-time greats. So I wouldn't call it the best author, he's not a regular author after all, but life's experiences reflecting indomitable will are an own genre by itself.
Coming to genres, what would you say is your favorite genre?
In viewing, action thrillers.
Really?
In a sense, in movies and all, junk. I like junk because it keeps me entertained and keeps me switched off.
It gets the job done.
So I don't like mushy things. I don't like very, very long romantic thrillers. Once in a while, okay. But if you're asking the reading part, then biographies. And second is history. Third is comparative religion I'm now getting interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And I must confess, mainly because of some of the talks and the interest shown in it by Justice Nariman, who is of course an outstanding thinker of this, is a genius. But it got me interested in the subject. And John Houston, Comparative Religions, I'm reading at the moment, which is interesting to get an idea of the Abrahamic religions versus the non-Abrahamic. I'm also going to Israel and Egypt in the holidays, so I'm looking forward to kind of validating my ideas in this. But I'm far off. I'm a speck on the ocean at the moment. There's an ocean out there. I read it.
So I'll let you go with one last question. If they were to lock you up in a Siberian gulag and throw the keys away, and they allowed you just 3 books into that little cell, which ones would those be? Which ones would you take in with you?
If I was forced to do that, then I would say either of the 2 India series of Guha. Cronin, yes. Remember, Cronin would be the first actually, because he was locked up in a counterpart of the gulag, and Mandela. But this is specific to your locking up.
Yes.
Because in the locking up situation, I think the first 2, Cronin and Mandela, are your best assets, your best allies.
Give you some succor while you're in there.
No, it gives you hope.
Yeah.
It gives you willpower. It tells you that ultimately it's all mind. Nothing more matters more than the mind. And there is always, depending on your willpower and your mind, a lot of light at the end of the longest tunnel.
Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, thank you very much for speaking with Bar and Bench. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.